Today's talk is co-sponsored by Hamilton Library, the Spark M. Matsunaga Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution, Hui Aina Pilipili, Native Hawaiian Initiative, the Hawaii Nui Akea School of Hawaiian Knowledge, the School of Communications, the Center for Oral History, and the Department of Ethnic Studies. And I noticed that Micah Mizaki from the Center for Oral History is here as well. They figure rather prominently in the discussion we're going to have today. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Donald Carriera Ching and Ken Tokuno, who will be moderating this panel on Talking Story, a panel on the Bamboo Ridge Oral History Project. Just speaking personally, my connections with Bamboo Ridge go back to almost the moment that I arrived here. The first poem I heard read in Hawaii was at a Hawaii Review reading in the fall of 1980, when Eric Chock read poem for George Helm. A few weeks later, I was at the launch of the Bamboo Ridge volume Sun, the collection of Darrell's short stories. So I got to hear Darrell and Eric and James Grant Benton and Phyllis Look and various other people read. That was my introduction to Hawaii literature, which has been a long, and I'm profoundly grateful for my connection to that over the last 41 years. One other thing I would mention in conjunction with what we're going to be talking about today, the history of the center is almost, and the journal biography are almost parallel to Bamboo Ridge. They both started in the late 70s. They're both up into the sort of mid 40s in terms of their history of publication, and the fact that despite all of the things that have happened over the last 40 years, both Bamboo Ridge and the center are still here. It's been my honor to be able to be involved in some small way in shaping this particular project. It was also my pleasure and honor to be involved in the radio show Aloha Shorts, which also reflected and was tied in various ways to the achievements of Bamboo Ridge. So I'm going to pass this over. We're looking at a new stage or an augmentation of Bamboo Ridge's legacy, and I'm very happy to pass this over to Donald Carriera Ching, who is currently a PhD candidate in the Department of English here at the university, but also an editor and a contributor and a strong supporter of Bamboo Ridge. Donald?
Thank you, Craig. It is very difficult to follow Craig when you're going to jump into this, and I do appreciate that wonderful introduction and all those kind words as well. Today we'll be talking about the Bamboo Ridge Oral History Project, which is a project that began just a short time ago. My name is Donald Carriera Ching. I am a PhD candidate or PhD student here at Manoa. I'm also a writer, instructor, and one of the co-directors of the project, along with Ken Tokuno. I'm joined by founding editors, Eric Chock and Darrell Lum, as well as the current editor-in-chief, Juliet Kono, and also Jean Yamasaki, Toyama, who is in charge of the Bamboo Ridge Preservation Project. Just for a little bit of background on the project, you sort of had a nice introduction via the flyer, but the idea of the project is really to examine and look at one, the ways in which Bamboo Ridge has been impacted literature here in Hawaii, as well as literature more broadly, and perceptions of literature and those kinds of things, as well as how it connects and intersects with other movements, and also to get a sense of what prompted and led up to the founding. So really to get a full understanding of the context surrounding Bamboo Ridge, as well as the impacts. In today's session, we're going to be discussing a little bit of context just in the first couple of slides. We'll discuss the inception of the Oral History Project. We'll talk a little bit about the process, because you might be interested in starting an oral history project yourself. So we'll provide a little bit about that and sort of how it came together. And then we'll talk about some key takeaways. The project is very much ongoing. In fact, we have around 6 individuals who are just within the first kind of set individuals to be interviewed, and those are still happening as we speak. But we'll be able to touch on a little bit of what we've already learned in just the interviews that we've had so far. After that, we'll get into some questions just from our panelists in terms of their sort of experiences so far with the project and why they got involved. We'll also kick off the question section with, what do you see as the impact of Bamboo Ridge in terms of Hawaii, in terms of local literature, in terms of literature more broadly. And then we'll go to questions from the audience. Okay, If you have a question, you're welcome to put it into the chat. Hopefully we'll get to it at the end. If it's something that's more relevant sort of as we're going through discussion, I'll be sure to sort of reference it or talk about it as we go. So very much organic, very much talk story in that particular respect. So, kind of loosen up as we go. Ken, we'll talk a little bit about the inceptions and goals of the project.
Hey, well, I retired from the University of Hawaii in 2017. And one of my immediate desires was to get more involved with Bamboo Ridge. So I did some volunteer work, and I met a lot of the people who were, central to the continuing of the journal. And I noticed that a lot of them were at least as old as I was. And I said, I wonder if anybody has really tried to, get everybody's personal stories about how Bamboo Ridge started and how it kept going. And so I remember, I knew that Craig was the director of the Center for Biographical Research. So we emailed back and forth, and we finally got together in August of 2019. And so I talked to him about, what I thought we might need to do, and, kind of relying on his expertise for insights into it. And ironically, Marie Hara had just recently passed away. And I regret to say that I didn't know her or of her contributions. I knew that she was, at the time she passed, the president of Bamboo Ridge. So Craig thought it was a great idea and underscored it with, the loss that Marie Hara represented and not being able to get her story. So we need to capture the stories of those who are still with us for some kind of permanent record of that. So we kind of divided the labor. He said that I should go to the board of Bamboo Ridge. By then I think I was on the board as grant officer. And so I presented to the board, and they were more than happy to participate in it and do whatever they needed to do to make it happen. In the meantime, Craig, I don't know if my dates are correct, but I think by then Donald was already a PhD student. And Craig thought he'd be good to work with since his heavy involvement with Bamboo Ridge. So Craig said he would get in touch with Donald and with the Center for Oral History. Time passed. Craig's a busy guy. And I think somewhere in the fall of 21, we finally arranged to have a webinar with the Center for Oral History. And by then we also had a group of volunteers who were willing to do the interviews. I almost hate to call them interviews because, as Donald already alluded to, it's more of a talk story kind of a project. We're really trying to get the personal stories from each of the major contributors to the journal so we can record them. And that's probably our central goal, is to get multiple perspectives on it, a comprehensive view, why they began the journal, how it began, who else was involved, especially those who are no longer with us. We want to get, even at secondhand, the stories of people who are important contributors from the very beginning. I was intrigued by Craig's mention of James Grant Benton, who I didn't even know was part of that story. So we want to get that. That's our primary goal, is to get all that recorded. I don't think we're going to do this as a video project. It's primarily audio, and we're going to be transcribing. Well, I think I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm turning on Donald's portion of this. But, and obviously the goal down the road is to make all this information available to the public in some fashion. When I first talked to Craig, I had the idea of maybe making a book out of it, but I don't think that's feasible in the short run. But at least being able to get the transcriptions of the interviews in some way that people can access it and find out for themselves. And at some point, hopefully, people will put it together and maybe even have a TV show on PBS about Bamboo Ridge's history. So that's my contribution for now. Donald?
Yeah, and I think we're about to go and talk a little bit about the process, but this question of sort of why an oral history project, as Ken was mentioning, it is really about getting that firsthand account, those firsthand experiences, those firsthand perspectives, because that's often something that might be lost in other forms of recorded history or in other forms of storytelling that are put forward. And so a lot of ways, the project itself, and Craig mentioned this when we were talking a little bit earlier in the semester and earlier in the year, is that, oral history projects, yes, they're about the events, yes, they're about the history, but they're about the people, the people involved, the people that were there, what they saw, what they experienced, how they felt. And that also kind of comes through in the oral history project in a different way than, say, if you're to read an interview, or if you were to see or read a news article or read a story or something along those lines. And I think that's something that's really behind the inception of this, to get those stories, to get them recorded, to hear those memories and those tales, because things come up in those oral histories that you just be surprised. I mean, I don't know, me and Eric just got done with our sessions, and I think we planned for about 3. I think we got to 5, Eric, and I think I planned like each about an hour. They lasted about 2 because each session. So we did about 10, 12 hours of recorded interviews. And I think it just, because of that talk story fashion, it just really just the stuff that came out, the stuff that was revealed, the stuff that we learned was just so powerful and so important. And I think that's one of the reasons why too, an oral history project here. So a little bit about the process, and I'm mainly providing this just so you get a sense of sort of like how things happened after the initial inception of it. But also, Craig had mentioned that some individuals might also be interested in perhaps starting an oral history project as well. It really began after we sort of talked with the board and got approval, and everything kind of got rolling. Really creating a list of key individuals, going to the people that we were thinking about interviewing, just the ones that kind of came off the top of our heads, and asking them, who else do you think would be important here? Who else do you think was involved, or who else do you think we should talk to get that kind of fuller picture, that fuller perspective on this particular topic and on Bamboo Ridge? From there, the net sort of widened and grew as more names added. I think in total right now, for the entire project, which we'll probably go on for a few years here, we probably have at least around 50 or 60 names that hopefully will end up kind of going into the archive and be preserved. We also did research into Bamboo Ridge, articles, the essays, the things that were written, looking at the historical context as well, and creating a timeline and mapping and seeing, from essentially when Bamboo Ridge started, sort of what happened before, what happened after, impacts during that time, what was happening at that time. And that actually helped reveal a lot and give me sort of already a clearer sense of things that I hadn't realized from other things that I have read or my other experiences with Bamboo Ridge, especially, from, I think it was just about 10 years after Darrell and Eric graduated high school that we get Bamboo Ridge published. And during just that 10-year span, so many movements with Asian American literature, with the Second Hawaiian Renaissance, things that were happening here in Hawaii, things that were happening in America were going on at that exact time. So when you kind of look at it against those timelines, you see that Bamboo Ridge, I mean, it almost represents kind of a natural sort of progression in terms of what was going on and what was happening. So we also worked in a timeline. And there's also the logistics and things that when I initially was like, oh yeah, an oral history project, that sounds great, I wasn't necessarily thinking of. Stuff like getting training in terms of IRB approval and learning about the ethics of oral history projects and how they work differently than an interview, in the sense that, this is the record that the individual wants to keep, so they kind of have control over that record. You're not an interviewer necessarily. You're kind of there to listen and to talk and just to hear the stories as you're being told and sort of guide things as you go. Also getting the permissions from them, creating permission forms, creating a list of interviews and getting a talk with them, but also getting volunteers for the interviewers. And when it came to the interviewers, the people that we wanted to be involved with this, we tried to choose people that had a connection, but could also help in terms of the process of shaping various things. And also thinking about format. I think one sort of nice thing about doing an oral history project in 2022 is you have access to Zoom. Compared to 10 years ago, that might not have been the case. And so you have a really easy way to conduct an oral history project here. Your interviewee can call in, they can go on video, you have a recorded transcript that will automatically transcribe for you. It's not perfect, but it does work a whole lot better than recording it on a cassette tape, playing it and trying to transcribe it just from as you go. Was much easier there. So that format was interesting, and that provided a lot of unique benefits there. There was also training, and we worked with Craig and with the Center for Oral History to work through this, trying to figure out, again, how is it different? How does it work? How do we go about it? And how do we go about it differently than a traditional interview? And that was really important. And then, of course, research. We had a set list of questions that we gave to every interviewee. that was going to be involved with the first set of interviews, but we also, through research on that individual, created questions that were specific to them, because that's important, right? Not everyone's experiences are the same there. And then, of course, there's the doing it, which involved, doing a pre-interview, calling an individual, having a little bit of conversation, talking through maybe some of the challenges, talking through some of the concerns, talking through some of the, like, ooh, I'm not sure about these kinds of details, as well as just kind of getting familiar with the individual too, and kind of creating the conversation from there. And then the interviews themselves. And I think that's, again, one thing that, because it is talk story style, because it is oral history, you might think, again, that you're going to do this in just 3 sessions and it's going to be really just like, all right, we're done. But you just never know where those oral histories are going to go. You never know where the interview is going to take you. You never know what might come up in the interview itself, as well as in the space between interviews. Again, we did about 5 weeks or five interviews, me and Eric, a week apart. So, during that week, other things would come up. We kind of touch base at the beginning of each interview, things that we might want to talk about again, revisit things that may have came up as we were sort of preparing for that particular session. So it was very interesting, and I think very organic in that particular respect. Okay. And again, if you have any questions in this particular, you're welcome to ask them in the chat, but we will have the questions at the end too, so you can save them for that as well. So key takeaways so far, as kind of already discussed or touched on a little bit. I think just from the initial interviews, right now, Eric, we've done. I understand mostly Eric. We might end up having to do a few more interviews if some other things come up. But from that, and also Darrell has done a few as well, a greater understanding of the historical context, a clear sense of the events and people and kind of the intersections and connections that weren't there. Bamboo Ridge has been around for a very long time. It is the oldest, I believe the oldest nonprofit independent literary press here in Hawaii. And the connections, the web connected to Bamboo Ridge, I mean, it is large, or the net rather connected to Bamboo Ridge is large. Craig was telling his story. I think everybody, for the most part, who's kind of been involved with literature here in Hawaii, at least for the last 40 years, probably has a story or a connection to Bamboo Ridge. So we're really finding those intersections and those connections, and that list of possible interviewees is expanding. And I think also just getting a clear sense of the impacts of the press, both at the time in which it came out, as the press became more successful, as well as getting a sense of sort of, again, that 10-year period between when Eric and Darrell graduated and when Bamboo Ridge Press was founded, with the talk story sessions, with poets in the schools, with what was going on in the Hawaii Literary Arts Council as well, and at the university, in terms of changes that were happening there. So again, a lot of those intersections and a lot of those connections that we're getting a clearer sense of here. Someone asked, Davey asked, I was wondering what transcribing program you use. So we use Zoom. Zoom does automatic transcriptions as long as you have a paid account. So it would automatically upload to the cloud, and then in a few minutes it would just download, and then we'd have the transcription, and then you can make all the corrections as you listen to it. It's not perfect though, definitely not perfect. Okay. And then in terms of the future of the project, interviews are ongoing. Again, we have a list of about 6. The major folks are being interviewed now, or it's happening. It will be happening in the next couple of weeks. There are many, many, many more interviews to come. And as we sort of get through the different groups, I'm sure that list will probably expand as we go. So again, this project is probably several years as we go, but it is a part of the preservation project that Bamboo Ridge has started. And it's something that will just, again, kind of continue to grow as the years go on. Interviews are currently being transcribed and will be archived and published, most likely as part of that preservation project. I'm currently working on transcribing and correcting the text for Eric's interviews. That in itself is a little bit of a longer process. It's not just transcribing it. Once I have the corrected transcription, and then send it over to Eric to take a look, and he makes corrections or any kind of changes that might need to be made, or anything that was perhaps missed in the interview as well. Then kind of go through that editing process before it finally sort of makes its way out there into the public. Bamboo Ridge's 45th anniversary issue will be coming up, and we're hoping to at least have Darrell and Eric's interviews or portions or excerpts from those interviews available in that issue. And so you can sign up for the Bamboo Ridge newsletter via the Bamboo Ridge's website, which I know Zoe shared in the chat, for more information on that particular issue and what's happening with the project if you're interested. And of course, there's also possible projects that go beyond this one, preservation project, other things that are happening. Although this project itself is focused on Bamboo Ridge, there could certainly be other projects, and it might end up being part of a larger study and larger oral history of literature here in Hawaii at the time and prior and after. Okay, so that's a little bit of context for you folks in terms of the project. I hope it gave you a little bit of understanding of sort of how things came together and how things are going. And now I figured we turn it over to kind of what the bulk of this presentation is about, which is our panel, and getting a little bit of information from them and having a little bit of a talk story session with them, kind of a live oral history project, if you would. So we'll kind of begin with the first 3 questions, and then maybe we'll go kind of in an order by whoever's first in my panel here in the chat, which would be maybe we'll start with Eric and then go to Darrell and then Juliet and then Jean. And Jean is, she's not one of the interviewers, but she is charged with the preservation project. I do have a specific question for you afterwards, Jean. I'm here too, but she will be interviewed at a later time as well. Okay, so we'll do the first 3 questions, and then we'll get to that last question of what do you think the impact of Bamboo Ridge has been, and then we'll kind of turn it over to the audience and kind of go from there. Sound good? Go ahead, Ken.
Okay, well, I'm just asking a question that you can see on the PowerPoint, but so starting with Eric, what made you decide to participate in the oral history project? You need to unmute yourself.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. As you know, I hesitated in the beginning. I'm not really sure what the value of the project is, as opposed to all the published material that's already out there, both in terms of the journal itself and all the essays and articles that different people have written. But I guess I decided to participate because people seem to keep asking questions and wanting to know, and so I thought that was worth it.
Okay, so now we turn to the co-founder, Darrell Lum. Darrell, what made you decide to participate in the oral history project?
Peer pressure from Donald Ching. What made me decide to participate is I have such a bad memory, is that I would hope that Eric would fill in all the blanks in my own memory, because I don't remember. Sometimes I don't remember where I parked the car, but I mean, so I depend on Eric to have the institutional memory, and I have the fictional memory.
Okay, great.
We're in trouble.
So I guess we turn to Juliet next, if I remember the order right. Juliet, I don't see you, but I know you're there. What made you decide to participate in the oral history project, Juliet?
You have to mute the mic.
Is Juliet there? Juliet?
I'm here. I'm here.
Okay.
So I just thought it was important for us. I was looking at all the work that Jean and Gail Kuroda had done on the project. And when I went on the site, the repository, I thought, wow, if we can do this, this is wonderful. And so I thought, oh, okay, if this is part of, this oral history is part of that, preservation thing. I think it's quite important for Bamboo Ridge. That's about it. I think that's how I decided. Okay, it was somebody's strong arm, but I don't remember whose it was that said Juliet.
Probably Jean.
But anyway, I decided, yeah, okay, this is a good deal. It's good for everyone.
Great, thank you. Okay, so turning to Jean finally. Jean, I think we can ask you to plug the preservation project a little bit too, since we've already alluded to it a couple times. But what made you decide to participate in the oral history project?
I was told to. But I actually want to talk about the origin of the preservation project, because I don't know if anybody remembers the meeting. I mean, maybe Hara asked me to join the meetings a few months before this conversation occurred, but people were talking about digitizing some issues. And then I think Wintech was bemoaning the fact that his garage was getting filled with issues of unsold Bamboo Ridge numbers. And then there was the talk of out of print issues. And then the idea that it would all perhaps disappear once the paper got eaten up by the termites. And I think that was Darrell's comment about, oh, it's going to turn to dust. And I said, I'm thinking now, why aren't they trying to preserve it? And that came down to the question of money. So, you know, Bamboo Ridge is always broke, and there was no money to preserve or try to get old issues preserved or digitized. I don't think that was even in my imagination. But at that time, the Renchi poets were working with Bob Huss at HCH on our project, What We Must Remember. And I just mentioned to Bob this question about, you know, how we can preserve the old issues or digitize the issues. And he says, well, Jean, don't you know we have a preservation fund here? And so that was in 2017, I think. And so nobody objected to it. So I wrote the grant and we got the grant. And then all of a sudden it started. And then I found out that you had a second grant. And then I said, oh, it's not ended yet. And I'm glad it continued. But the more I got into it and the more I read the project and the more I listened to what Eric was saying, and I read what he said about why he wanted to have Bamboo Ridge exist, I said, you know, it would be a shame if this all disappeared after all of these years of work and effort. And then all the voices from Hawaii that were not usually heard were almost all of a sudden magically given a platform on which they could be heard. And a few years ago, the Smithsonian had a project just for Asian American and Pacific Islander writers, and we weren't invited. And it reminded us again of our being forgotten and left out. And so a former president of the AAA, Stephen Sumida, wrote an irate letter and we got invited. And since then, we haven't been forgotten. So I think that my reason for starting with this was that Bamboo Ridge is something worthy not to forget. It's something that must continue. It's part of Hawaii's history, not only the history of its writers, but the history of its society, the history of the way that people felt, feel, and continue to feel, and the evolution of that history too. And if you read what, or listen to what Eric and Darrell said at our opening in 2019 or 20? Yeah, 2019. I mean, it's very revelatory. And I'm really happy that the preservation project got started, and we've got most of the out of print books already done, digitized, and we're getting our issues out into the world. So did I answer your question?
Yes, and then some. Thank you, Jean. So we go to the second question, return to Eric, and the question is, what do you see yourself learning from or taking away as a participant in this project? Eric?
I guess here I echo Darrell. What I'm learning is I forgot a lot. And I have to go through all my old notes and look up things and get reminded of what I was thinking and what we did do. And I just hope that some people somewhere find that interesting or useful in some way. That's about it.
Thank you. Darrell, same question. What do you see yourself learning and taking away from this for your involvement in this project?
I think the project has more to do with being old than with a takeaway. Yeah. You know, I think it is interesting to revisit particular, I don't know, issues or, and at this point, sometimes I look at an issue and, you know, you go and you scratch your head and say, what were we thinking? You know, and at the same time, you look at some issues and it's like reading it for the first time. So that part of it's, you know, kind of fun.
Good, thank you. Okay, and Juliet, what do you see yourself learning or taking away from this, your involvement in this project? Need you to unmute.
Forget all kinds of things. But Darrell, I'm with you. I mean, you know, I've forgotten a lot of things, and but I also wanted the students we worked with. I mean, we had people really enjoy what we were doing, and they could, you know, go into our website, I mean, the repository, pick out our books, read them, and they thought that was really cool. And no, and part of it is all vanity. No, but I'm just kidding. But that's about it for me anyway. I thought, I'm thinking it's a wonderful thing that Jean started, and I really appreciate all the, you know, all the things that came out of this, and how so many people out there. Jean, you have the statistics. I don't know all the, but there's a lot of people who have visited the site. So, you know, that's a real good thing. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so I looked at the latest statistics on the preservation project, and there's over 4,000 unique visitors. Even people in Ukraine are checking out Bamboo Ridge's site, so that says a lot. Okay, and Jean, what do you see yourself learning from or taking away from being a participant?
Jean.
Having to go back and look at the back issues just to do the preservation project. There's lots of issues I never read because I'm a very late comer to the heart of Bamboo Ridge, if you know, going to the meetings and listening to all that stuff. So I learned that there are parts of Bamboo Ridge that go beyond what would imagine Hawaii's confines, because you have Albert Saijo outspeaks Rhapsody, and he's with the Beat Poets, and he says some outrageous things. But you know, I'm started to read this. I don't think I ever read it before, and I said, "Wow, he's making me think." And then I'm looking at the poets behind barbed wire, and only now I see other places printing poets, you know, haiku and tanka from people who had to be imprisoned. So I think, you know, the editors, past and present, are very modest about what Bamboo Ridge did and continues to do. I think it is an important voice of the little people like us of the island. I have an anecdote to say that it took me a hard time to get anything accepted by Bamboo Ridge. I would keep on sending things in, and the first thing that they accepted was something like eating fish heads. And I said, God, that's what the kind of poems they want? Something about eating a fish head. So, I mean, that was and I kept on writing about fish and octopus and things like that. So anyway, I have other stories, but I'll spare you.
Okay, I'm going to turn the remaining questions over to my co-moderator, Donald. Donald?
Yeah, you know, I think maybe this, you're just kind of summarizing some of what's being discussed, but I think also speaks to, and you can answer this question too, Ken, you know, why I wanted to get involved with the project. I think, and it's just that the need persists, I think, is the idea. You know, in the interviews we've had, me and Eric, you know, he mentioned how at the start, when Wing Tech Lum came on, he would always kind of say, like, it doesn't pencil out, you know, the money's not always there. And for a long time, and still to this day, right, it doesn't pencil out, but, you know, it continues to go, it continues to be successful, it continues to kind of go out there. And I think it's because, in large part, as has kind of been emphasized by you folks, the community, there's a need for it from the community, there's a demand for it from the community. You know, Eric had talked about just, you know, the stuff that they would get from here in Hawaii, but from other places, and to kind of see that coming together. And as was talked about in terms of the preservation project, just how far that preservation project reaches across, you know, internationally, nationally. And although, you know, it's been 45 years, I think, you know, when we were talking a little bit about the history in the interviews and kind of looking at what was going on in the 70s and the 80s, you would kind of think, you know, how far we've come, but at the same time, how far as a society and a culture we're still struggling with. And we've kind of see that, right, in terms of the last couple of years, in terms of the discrimination, the stigmas, and the stereotypes. Even with things like, you know, pigeon, which is, you know, largely been accepted, I would say, right? It's being studied and discussed very differently than it was back in the 70s and when Bamboo Ridge came about. It's still a sort of a topic that comes up when we have events. You know, people might say things like, you know, why are you publishing this kind of stuff? This isn't necessarily literature. And it's kind of like, wow, you know, so I think that need persists. And also for the students, I teach literature, I teach composition, I teach creative writing at Leeward. And I do give my students, you know, among other texts, Bamboo Ridge authors. And I think, you know, they always tell me, like, you know, Mr. Professor, I never even knew this existed, you know, like, I can't even believe this is here. And all of a sudden you see them kind of writing and engaging with different voices and in different ways. And I think that's really very much why, you know, I started volunteering at Bamboo Ridge, sending my stuff in, but also getting involved with this project because of just how important it is in that particular respect, in terms of those connections with the intersections, but also just because, yeah, I mean, the need persists. It doesn't pencil out, but hey, to some degree it does. Okay, we'll go to the next question. And maybe we've kind of answered this already, but what do you hope will be gained from your involvement? And anybody can answer. I think we'll just leave it open. Anybody, what do you hope to be gained from your involvement?
Maybe I can speak a little bit to that. what's to be gained is maybe an understanding that at the time of the founding of Bamboo Ridge, that was publishing a journal on paper was really the only option for local writers. I mean, you know, I guess students nowadays, you know, have the option of the internet and a web page, or you know, there's certainly more ways to get your work out. And at the time of the founding, there was only one, right? I mean, it was, you know, send your work out to literary journals. And for Hawaii writers, it was pretty much get rejected. And I recall some mainland literary magazines wanted either a glossary or footnotes in order to be understood. And Eric and I said, well, you know, you read European-based stuff with references, they expect you to look it up, right? I mean, you know, you know, you don't need to have a footnote. You have to do the work to gain the understanding, you know. And the other thing I would like to mention is that my first memory of meeting Juliet, I was working in student services at UH, and she would come in nearly every week with a, you know, with a new submission, right? And you know, her persistence was amazing. So Jean, you know, Eric and I rejected the best of you.
Well, you know,
when I first met Darrell and Eric, I must say, I was so afraid of them. I was so scared. I mean, it was like giving my, you know, my paper like this to gods of writing. No, but yeah, I was very scared of everything. But anyway, that was the beginning. And they were so kind. They were so very kind. Thank you.
I don't know if Eric or Jean or Ken, I mean, you can also comment on your, I mean, I talked a little bit
Well,
about
I
mine.
love that what just happened between Darrell and Julia. I mean, that's kind of a reflection of how this talk story thing is has so much depth and is so interesting and vital, and it's really important to get all this down. So we carry on.
And I'll just jump and snowball in on this to suggest how this works. Speaking of Juliet's fear, the first time I saw Juliet read was at a Bamboo Ridge reading, and she didn't read because she was so terrified about reading in public that she went up and stood on the stage while a friend read her poetry. Since then, she has given hundreds of readings, including at my invitation, and become a major literary personality in Hawaii. But that is still my first memory of Juliet, standing silently while the person next to her read the poems.
Do you remember Lois Yamanaka fainting at the mic?
Yes.
Right? Yes. We all had cold feet. It was so new to us, all this. It was very frightening. Yeah. So, but you were so kind. So,
Well, I think I can jump in here and encourage people in the audience to ask questions. I did because to a certain degree, this is new and old home week. I did want to acknowledge that among
Can you
other
look
people,
at my?
oh, can you hear people hear me? Yeah, I wanted to acknowledge one of the people who's online here is someone who was here. I think he's still here. Yes, Rob Wilson is online here. Some of you, that is a real blast from the past. But Rob was here at the very beginning and around when Bamboo Ridge got started and involved in Hawaii Review and has written extensively about Pacific and Hawaii literature over the years. So it's great to see Rob online here. Aiko Yamashiro, I'm mentioning because she's the director of the Hawaii Council for the Humanities, which has provided a lot of the funding and support for the preservation project. So it's nice to see her here as well. And then another person who's been the voice of so many things related to Bamboo Ridge over the years, Keith Kashiwada, is also online here participating and viewing. So I just wanted to say hello to them and also to Maika Mizukami, who is from the Center for Oral History and helped do the training for the people who are doing the interviews and whatever and provided support as well. And please, any questions coming from the audience or questions from the panelists that they want to ask each other? Please go ahead. And I'll throw one in just quickly. Bamboo Ridge started out as Bamboo Ridge, the Hawaii Writers Quarterly. We were putting it out every 3 months, all right? At a certain point, it moved into what weren't even really special issues, but started publishing individual books. So it wasn't just a matter of being a literary journal, it was also the venue for some of the first books of many of Hawaii's most distinguished writers. So I was wondering if because I don't know if Eric's still with us, but I was going to ask Darrell, how did that shift? At what point did you realize you were going to not necessarily put stuff out every 3 months?
If I recall, I think it was mostly an economic issue. It costs more to be a quarterly than to, wait and compile it, even if it was the same number of pages, in the end, it was cheaper to do it twice a year, basically.
And when did you decide you were going to start doing individual books or collections? I think yeah. Actually, erase that. We got 2 questions there, and let's start with Rob. You can definitely turn Rob's mic on. Hey, Rob. Oh, there we are.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I just have a brief suggestion. I'm like Father Time here, like Darrell and Eric are saying. I was there when the flood began, but I kind of remember the battle between Frank Chin and Maxine Kingston at the Bamboo Ridge conference, and then I kept in touch with Frank Chin over the years, and then initially he was very interested in Bamboo Ridge, but then I saw him like 20 years later somewhere in San Francisco, and he basically said to me something like, "You mean there's still Bamboo Ridge? They're still writing over there?" He had almost like no interest in it, and that was really kind of shameful to me and sad. But the person that I recommend that people engage with, and it was my first real involvement with Bamboo Ridge, was I wrote a review of All I Asking For Is My Body by Milton Murayama. And that was kind of the first review of that book. And then I became really good friends with Milton, who was up in San Francisco. And then he passed away maybe 3 or 4 years ago, but I'm in touch with his wife, Dawn, and she's preserving all of Milton's records. They're going to be in the Pacific Library collection at UH, digitalized, et cetera. So I think Milton Murayama, he was really an advocate and a participant of Bamboo Ridge right from the start, from 78 on. And I think the oral history people might want to get in touch with Dawn Murayama, because she's his wife and she was kind of part of it all too. So that's somebody I don't think should be forgotten, because Milton probably wrote the most memorable, novel about the Hawaiian plantation era, and has a whole Oyama saga of 3 Murayama novels that UH Press ought to reissue as one saga. But anyway, so as you can see, I'm kind of long-winded about it. But yeah, there's a lot of history that's worth preserving, so yeah, enough said.
Yeah. And as a further suggestion, one of the people that down the road you might want to get in touch with, Donald, is Rob Wilson. We have a comment from Lahela Ke, who says, "Aloha, is there a way to volunteer or become involved in transcribing on this project?" Mahalo. Donald, do you want to address that?
Yeah, you can just get in touch with me, donaldc@hawaii.edu. We can kind of talk a little bit about that and go from there. We'll certainly need help with that as the project continues.
Well, I mean, if she's willing to actually serve as an interviewer, we could use more interviewers too, right? I mean, because one of the things about transcribing is if you haven't done the interview, there may be references to places or events that you're not really sure the transcriber has gotten right. So I think it might be better for her to actually do the interviews and then the transcriptions. No? Yes?
Yeah. Just like I said, email me, we can get those details and we'll be in touch.
Okay. And a comment from Aiko Yamashiro. "Thanks to everyone for sharing these memories and stories. They're really powerful to hear and feel like a gift and a spur to younger writers to go for it." Okay. Yes. And Lahela says, "I'd be happy to be trained and get into contact." So we're good as far as that's concerned. All right. And Carol Abe, who is from UH Press, who is also on here, put on into the chat, "Milton passed away in 2016. Here is a blog post we did at UH Press, and they did publish the further volumes. And Rob was actually heavily involved in getting All I Asking For Is My Body published by UH Press a long time ago as well, too." Other questions or comments?
Well, I was going to suggest, Craig, in answer to your question about kind of the publishing history, that you might want to see if Wingtech Lum knows the answer to that, him being the pencil pusher for Bamboo Ridge for, I don't know how long ago.
Well,
Wingtech Lum might know some of that.
Eric, who's actually, he's his computer dropped out, but he's on the phone. Eric, you missed, and we did talk a little bit about this in one of the interviews. I don't know if you want to talk, Craig had asked about why did you folks transition from a quarterly to a bi-yearly journal, and then why did you folks decide to do special issues? And Darrell had kind of talked about a little bit about how the numbers didn't pencil out, borrowing again from Wingtech Lum. I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Sounds like he probably covered it, and I think in addition to not penciling out, there's just a lot of time and effort, and labor intensive. The stories about staying up really late at Darrell's house and pasting the poems onto the boards, proofing and looking for the commas and getting the little X-Acto knife and taking a comma from some scrap piece of paper and pasting it, with the hot wax into the text so that, we could fix it. So, it took a long time to do all those things, just the little things. And then I would say, of course, related to the general mission of nurturing the literature, people look towards novels and single author books, and we wanted to make sure that we could do whatever we could to put people out there who we thought deserve that kind of recognition. It makes it easier for professors to assign, I think, as opposed to what you might just call a magazine. But there was that also. But yeah, it was too much too often. It was a lot of work.
I just pointed out the irony of this is because there was too much work, so that it wasn't just anymore quarterly that was publishing new work every single issue. What we got out of that was the collection of Sun. We got both of Juliet Lee's two books. We got Expounding the Doubtful Points. That's the point at which Bamboo Ridge went from being just a journal to being a press. That it turned out that it was publishing major collections and first volumes. Saturday night at the Hala Theater. I was in a PhD exam today where one of the major discussions in terms of text was 3 years on Doreen's sofa. So that actually Bamboo Ridge, the journal, became Bamboo Ridge, the press, and it's been contributing both in those ways because those individual volumes are the ones that often, probably more than the journal installments, are actually the ones being taught and kept in print. And Carol Abe put in, besides the subscription part of publishing, do Darrell and Eric recall getting the issues into local bookstores at that time, specifically Honolulu bookshops in the early years? Distribution. And Darrell's already laughing.
Eric will tell you about how to get Bamboo Ridge issues into Long's Manoa.
Yeah, more than one Long's barrel, right? At one point. Well, first of all, we should go back to the what was it? The old white Valiant that I used to drive around at that time, and you know how Darrell had made the Bamboo Ridge title logo, and he had a silk screen. He silk screened the Bamboo Ridge logo to the doors of my white Valiant. So I had my T-shirt, I had my car, my official company car, and I drove to every bookstore, on the island, around the island, partly because I was driving around the island anyway for poets in the school. And, I stopped everywhere, the little record magazine store in Haleiwa. And, in those days we had bookstores, actual little bookstores that have been so long gone, I can't even remember the names of them. But yeah, I tried them all, and that was a high point to get into Long's. That was something.
For listeners who don't know what Eric was referring to about wax, is that this was before desktop publishing, and you actually had to go to a typesetter, and the typesetter would type out all the poems and the stories on small sheets of paper, and we would have to actually physically there's a waxing machine that puts a thin coat of wax, and it was kind of used like you would rubber cement, but wax was better because you could more easily lift it up and reposition it. But yeah, that's the story behind using wax. The other part of it is that late at night, when you discover that there was a comma missing, that's what Eric was referring to. You don't want to wait till the next day to go back to the typesetter and have them reset one paragraph. So instead, you look on the floor for the scraps and you find a stray comma, or you assemble a word. I won't mention that one of the disadvantages of wax is that we once had a managing editor who will go unnamed, whose job was to take these layout boards that we had stayed up all night to finish, and her job was to take it to the printer. Unfortunately, she left the layout boards in her car while she was going shopping or something, and the wax melted and all the pieces of paper fell off. We will never let her forget that.
What I remember is that we used to go to Darrell's house and go up a loft, right?
Yeah.
In your home. We had to go up a ladder.
A ladder, yeah, because there was no stair.
And I thought that was neat. And that's how they work.
We got two other comments in the chat. One is Lanning Lee, of course. Lanning is here, and he said he bought his first Bamboo Ridge. It was number 4 at Columbia Inn, which was actually another place for that. And then Lahela added again, we should do an oral history about this and their process. Lol. Well, actually, assembling the various oral histories that Donald's going for, we'll probably get a mosaic that will put it all together. But I would just add one other thing in terms of oral history, which is Donald doesn't need another thing to add in here. But you're increasingly seeing with oral history projects that people are saying the best thing to do is to get 2 or 3 of the people together and have them talk to each other, because it often generates and snowballs memories in the way that it just did now. So you might want to start thinking about creating a Renchi oral history project. Okay. I would like to thank you all for being here and for participating in the project. We've been lucky enough at the center to be involved in sort of the inception of this. Believe it or not, Donald, as a PhD student, is getting a grade for this, hiding in the background. And so I would like to thank everyone for being here. Thank you, Zoe, again, for everything you have contributed to the center. And I hope we will see you all in the fall. Please sign up so you'll get notice. And in the fall, we'll be doing another 14 to 16 sessions of Brown Bag Biography. So thank you, everyone, and good luck in moving the project forward.